Welcome, everyone. We're here with Tomer from Stellar. I have the pleasure to interview him today on this Fireside chat about privacy and building opt-in compliance ready. I'm Rekha. I'm the director of marketing of Boundless Protocol, which is a universal zero-knowledge protocol and the largest prover network out there already. We'll get started with, I'll give you guys a little context on Vitalik, our mighty leader in the EVM space, has given a talk this week, actually yesterday at Devconnect, about the roadmap of Ethereum and gave a lot of insight around the blockchains, what they're good for, what they're not good for, to give a lot of context. And I want to use that context as our anchor today because he did highlight this. And it is true that blockchains, as they are, generally are not good for low latency, extreme scalability. And the third thing is privacy, which is what we'll talk about today. There are, however, tools that we can integrate with blockchains that make privacy way easier, almost as an already accessible feature that we can opt into when we're building more blockchains and applications on blockchains, which we'll discuss today a little bit with Tomer. And the first question around it is around institutions, compliance, and being ready for the change that's already happening in crypto, privacy being more of a must and not an afterthought. So the first question to you is, how do we build compliance-ready solutions? What do they actually look like? And what should builders keep in mind when they are building these solutions? What are the frameworks and the must-do steps when they're building compliance-ready?
Sure. So I think the first thing to understand is that we don't actually know what compliance looks like in private blockchains because the regulator haven't actually said anything. And so it's up to us to kind of figure it out as we go. And so if we take a step back, I think that we kind of have a good spectrum of privacy in blockchains that's defined by the extremes. So on one side, we have open networks as we know them today. And so I think that, right now we have completely open networks like, Stellar, Solana, Ethereum, and others, where everything is open by default. Everyone sees everything. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the more hardcore privacy solutions like Zcash, for example. Zcash is an amazing project. I love it. If you are shielded, everything is private by default. With that said, I don't see a world in which something like Zcash is used for payroll, for merchant payments, for remittances. And so now that we have these two extremes, we need to figure out what does real adoption look like in terms of privacy. And so, like I said, compliance is not defined, so it's up to us to kind of figure it out, both from the foundations, from the actual, what privacy guarantees are users actually needing, and this will differ. Like a payroll is very different from a merchant payment.
Do you think figuring out compliance comes more from taking what we do have in traditional systems and mirroring that more in a decentralized, even more privacy-aware manner? Or do we come up with a whole new set of rules that blockchains can unlock that traditional systems could never do?
I think we need to, as product people, we need to talk to the people building on blockchains, especially the traditional financial institutions that are now coming to blockchain. Figure out what do they actually expect from privacy. And I think that a lot of times what we see is that enterprises, they come to the table, they say they want privacy, and then we're like, okay, tell me your requirements. And then they have nothing to say because privacy sounds good, but in theory, what you're looking for is, a complex set of requirements. And this is why we don't see privacy as a unified solution. Privacy is very different between use cases. Privacy in terms of the implementation is a constantly moving target. And so that's why in Stellar, we're not enshrining any specific privacy protocol into the L1, but rather we're trying to provide the building blocks so that people can build these configurable solutions.
That actually is a perfect segue of how Stellar's built up. I would like to talk a little bit about the current available stack for builders, um, including more aspirational parts of the stack that we know aren't fully ready, but there are magnificent teams working on them, and including parts that are already truly ready and out of the box that we can build with. Could you say a little bit about the stack, about what's available for builders currently?
Yeah. So, like I said, the the privacy stack is a moving target. But what we know right now is probably that zero knowledge cryptography is the most established technology. I hear you're really into zero knowledge cryptography, by the way.
I am.
Um, and so I think with regards to ZK, we really want to enable developers, and that means making ZK more available and more accessible. And when I say available, I mean, there's a lot of cryptographic building blocks that are required out there. And so right now, Stellar's Protocol 25, which is codenamed X-Ray, we're rolling this out right now and it introduces a bunch of additional cryptographic building blocks. So we're talking about pairing-friendly elliptic curves. We're talking about ZK-friendly hash functions like Poseidon. So kind of like the nuts and bolts of ZK. But making it accessible is not, making it available is not enough. We also want to make it accessible. And
What does that mean? Making ZK accessible.
so if you've
Give me
ever
the
tried,
boundless pitch.
if you've ever tried writing a ZK application or a ZK circuit using something like Circom, you probably know that it's not an easy task. And, most of the people out there doing these things are like trained cryptographers. And so the question is, how do we make this technology more accessible? So there are a bunch of like really great projects out there that are working on this. For example, we're collaborating with the Noir Lang ecosystem on bringing the Noir programming language that's specific for ZK into Stellar, and that's kind of like a higher level abstraction than something like Zircon. And we're also working with Risk Zero and with the Boundless ecosystem, and specifically with Nethermind on bringing the Risk Zero verifier onto Stellar. Risk Zero is a ZK VM. ZK VMs are really interesting because they allow you, the developer, to write code in a regular programming language that you're already used to using, like Rust in most cases. We're big Rust fans in the Stellar ecosystem, and so we're all into that. And so I think that these building blocks, alongside with these kind of like higher level abstractions, are going to make ZK more accessible. And X-Ray, that is being released right now into Stellar, is really like a huge step function and an enabler for that.
In the name of accessibility as well, I would like to talk a little bit about the contrast between having open source solutions versus not open source solutions, the level of permissionlessness that we can grant with this accessibility. What are your opinions on building transparent, auditable systems versus ones that are more proprietary solutions? What would be the benefit of having an open source solution that is more accessible to builders to guarantee as much privacy for compliance as possible versus having a more closed system one?
Yeah, so I think there are like two orthogonal concepts here. One is open in the sense of like open source, just kind of like the classic having access to the code, and then the other is kind of like how transparent should blockchains be in the presence of privacy and what changes there. On the open source side of things, it's a given. I think that we're dealing with interoperable systems that promote trust minimization. And the only way that these things can truly get adoption is by the type of trust and auditability that open source provides. And so I think that's a given in blockchain in general, not just in privacy systems, but in privacy systems specifically, because they are so delicate, because ZK is like very complex math. We want as many eyes as possible on these systems. So open source is a given. Um, I think on the transparency and the permission side of things, it's a bit more complicated, and it really depends on what type of system you're building. And this is why I said originally that I don't think there's a one size fits all in privacy. And I think that we're going to see a lot of different solutions. A lot of them are going to be on the more permissioned side of things, especially as we bring kind of like compliance operators into the picture, especially as we bring things that are kind of like uneasy for us to talk about, like these global audit keys, so that you can actually have, at the end of the day, we want the authorities to be able, the FBI needs to knock on a door somewhere and be able to ask for a record of, something. If illicit activity happens, right? So we need to identify these people. We need to answer these uncomfortable questions, and so, but we still think at Stellar that transparency is core to blockchains, and we don't want to lose this in this path we're taking to privacy. And so we still want the core layer to be completely transparent. It is not only from a principle perspective, but from a very functional perspective. Institutions are really excited about transparency as provided by blockchains today. And as we bring privacy, we want to make sure that we leave this auditability in place and kind of like find ways to mitigate between the two.
Is this our job to set up these opt-in systems that we're building the future of the internet, we're building the future of technology? Let's have that as the base. Yes, institutions are very excited about transparency. There's a level of surveillance that can come with that. So, as us responsible for building these systems out, where do you think blockchain builders and us who are bringing this about should have the control of where the barrier for that visibility is? Because ideally, it's not necessarily put on the user, but also not decided by the institution itself, because then we're kind of in the same bucket. It's just a faster system with more optionality. Where's the line?
It all depends on who's the we that we're talking about, right?
Builders,
Yeah.
us as the crypto people.
I think that historically, the crypto builders in the crypto ecosystem tend to be like very ideologically driven, which is great. And if you're building, a ZK proof system, then Godspeed. You're in the building blocks. Let the people use it in whatever way they want. We are taking a more kind of like holistic, mission-driven approach, which means that we actually want to see real adoption, which means that we need to answer uncomfortable questions, and we can't avoid them by saying, "Oh no, we're building like these cryptographic building blocks. Let other people figure out what to do with it."
Accountability.
Yes.
In our last few minutes, I would like us to talk about 2026. As majority of the opinions on the internet right now, and from basically all the keynotes, this is the largest developer event for the Ethereum ecosystem during the whole year, and a lot of the conversations are around privacy and zero knowledge as well. So we know we can predict that 2026 is very much about privacy, and it will very much be about scalability and privacy together. Hopefully, also solving some interoperability issues that we still have underlying, but very much about privacy. So I would like to ask you to cover a little bit about how can we, the builder ecosystem, prepare for 2026? What should we focus on as the industry? What are key elements that we should turn our attention to be able to satisfy this growth and this advancement within the privacy landscape?
Yeah. Look, I'll start from the bottom line, which is build products that people will use. There's a lot of great things you can do in the building blocks. You can build ZK, you can build FHE, you can build client-side proving, which is super important for privacy. We don't want to dump all of our information to like a centralized operator that has access to everything. But really, at the end of the day, and this is an argumentative statement, the tech is kind of here. Okay. It's not aspirational. ZK is ready for mainstream adoption. So the question is, how do we take this amazing technology and build usable products around this? Usable user wallets, usable enterprise solutions, usable interfaces for compliance operators to use. We've had selective disclosure in the space of private systems for the past, ever since Zcash launched with view keys. I haven't seen a single good product built around view keys that actually allows you to do the selective disclosure with view keys. And so we really need to move away from building the building blocks and moving to building usable products on top of them.
What do we need for that? More hackathons? Because private compute, zk-TLS, zk-VMs, scalable, permissionless, open zero knowledge infrastructure that is ready, I agree with you. Then what do we need to push that forward for 2026?
I think we need to make these things like more accessible, like we talked about in the context of Risk Zero and ZK VMs, but it's also make them like more available to other stakeholders that are not in the hardcore crypto scene. So make this available for, with SDKs for front end developers to use. bring, God forbid, bring lawyers into the picture to understand these systems and to help guide us. Just kind of like really open this up to the rest of the world, and kind of like move away from like ideology into actual practicality.
I think we're ready for 2026 then. We do have to do a lot of work to be more open for that. And that is what we had time for today. We got some insights. I hope you all had some nuggets to take away from this. Thank you so much, Tomer, for your answers, and your knowledge and sharing it with us. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Reka. Thank you, everyone.